on to my house.
You're listening to BBC Radio 6 Music. I'm Tom Robinson. That's Rosemary Clooney with Come On to My House, a song that I first discovered thanks to interviewing our guests tonight, Sparks, who are with me in the studio. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello. Yeah, that song, it actually was the inspiration for the title for Come On to My House, obviously, and we had just a Japanese theme for the cover, and we didn't have a title for the album, and so we kind of chose a bad play on words, and so that song is very meaningful to us to this day. And
you started as you meant to go on, indeed. We've had a number of playful album titles over the years. A Woofer in Tweeter's Clothing preceded it. Womp That Sucker, I love that. Angst in My Pants. Gratuitous sax and senseless violins, plagiarism, balls, Lil Beethoven, of course, and we'll get on to the seduction of Ingmar Bergman a little bit later on. But last year at the Six Music Festival in Glasgow, you had a major slot there, and it was kind of like Queen playing at Wembley Stadium at Live Aid. You kind of took the ball and you ran with it, establishing yourselves as a kind of, we will show these young upstarts how it's really meant to be done. And it was a wonderful performance. So I'd like to play in a track from that, because you played the title track of the album that we hadn't yet heard at that point, which was Hippopotamus.
There's a hippopotamus.
You're listening to Six Music. That's Hippopotamus, live at the Six Music Festival in 2017 by Sparks, who are our guests tonight. And that was the title track of your most recent album.
That's right. And it was the first time we had actually performed those songs, and the album hadn't been out at that time, so it was also one of those propositions where you're kind of, we normally have an album that comes out and then you pick a selection of songs from that album, and then people are a little familiar with them, but this time it was the performance at the Six Music Festival was months before Hippopotamus, the album, was released, so we unveiled some songs then, and but we were happy the reception was really strong for those, even with the audience having not heard anything yet, so we were really encouraged by that.
That is, though, it's an eternal kind of conundrum for bands, because you spend 2 years preparing a record, writing it, recording it, and you know the songs nobody else out there does.
Right. But, we're really fortunate because the people that do follow what we do expect that kind of challenge. It's just at a festival like the Six Music Festival, there are probably a lot of unconverted people, and so you kind of tread a little bit lightly as far as new material being injected in the set. Now we've started performing a lot more of the new album, so when we're touring this time around, there are quite a few songs from the new record that we're doing live.
Now, it's an astonishing career, lasting literally 50 years. Was it 67, 68 when you started?
Well, probably some of the early incarnations of the band. The first actual Sparks album was in 72, so it's not quite that long, but the first album we were called Half Nelson at the time, and then it was with Todd Rundgren had produced the first album of ours, and he was, without his sort of support and sticking his neck on the line that he wanted to sign us to his label. It was called Bearsville at the time, and also produced that album. And it was he and also another really interesting character named Albert Grossman, who was part owner of the company with Todd. And Albert Grossman was Bob Dylan's manager at the time, and some other artists as well that were also interesting. So it seemed really unlikely to us having this guy that was managing Bob Dylan also finding something of interest musically and personally, personality-wise, in what Sparks was doing at that time. Because even at that time, the music was pretty uncompromising in what it was. And
yeah, an interesting point that I think you made in interviews talking about that time is that it was for the exact same reason that every other record company had turned you down that Todd Rundgren chose to work with you, because it wasn't like anything else that was going on, and people were going, well, I can't hear this on the radio.
Well, exactly. And also, just to his credit, he didn't want to kind of sand off the rough edges. He wanted to keep it really extreme, but he just wanted it to sound better. And so that first album that we recorded with him producing, it was really a dream of ours, because we were pretty much recreating things that we had done in a demo sort of way, with no kind of thought of commercial success. And he just wanted us to be what we were, but just sounding better.
And yeah, I suppose that's the thing. But the music you were listening to at the time was very Anglophile. You were really kind of focused towards this side of the Atlantic, and stuff, again, with rough edges on it. So, like, specifically the Syd Barrett version of Pink Floyd, rather than the rough edges smoothed off kind of Pink Floyd.
Exactly, you said it, not us.
Yeah.
No, we loved specifically the Syd Barrett era, and we were from Los Angeles, and so things like Pink Floyd at that time, and the early Who, and the early Kinks, and the Move.
The Move, particularly.
Yeah, the Move. We were really big fans of their music, and it was something that was so exotic to us living in LA at that time, and just in all sorts of ways, just musically, lyrically, the image of those bands, and and it was so foreign to us and exotic that we really liked. It was really appealing to us, and then it became a dream sort of fulfilled when we got an offer to come to relocate to London and to to record that first album, the first UK album, which became Kimono My House, and to have that become a success here.
I think a lot of UK listeners who are kind of familiar with your career curve and first saw you, well, people of my age anyway, first saw you on Top of the Pops doing this town, wouldn't have realised that you were already well entrenched in the underground scene, and you'd already had a residency at the Marquee Club. You'd had Bob Harris kind of singing your praises on Old Grey Whistle Test. Yeah,
it was really odd for us that period, because we had the first album that was produced by Todd Rundgren, and then the next album was called Wolfer in Tweeter's Clothing. They were released, but there was really no kind of impact in the States at all. But the label at the time had felt that they thought that the sensibility might appeal better over here in Britain, and so they sent us to Britain, and we did 4 weeks in a row, one time a week at the Marquee Club in London, and then all of a sudden there were people lining up to see this band that were in LA. We'd get 3 waitresses at the Whiskey A Go Go who liked us, but not really much beyond that. And so it was this really weird situation for us, that what we were doing had such a immediate appeal in this part of the world where it didn't at home.
It's such a well-established path too, that for American artists of a certain stripe, they need to come to the UK, or certainly to Europe, in order to get the recognition that they deserve, and it's only then that they can export that back to their home country. So Jimi Hendrix was just like a bar guitarist, mildly astonishing people in Café Wah, and that comes over to Britain and plays the Speakeasy, and people tear their hair out and put him on the radio.
No, it's amazing. I mean, in our case, it was especially strange, because we wanted to be a British band. I mean, Jimi Hendrix was, it was really special music, but it wasn't particularly British music that he was doing. It was obviously super flashy and all, but we were trying to emulate the British bands much more closely than he was. I mean, we failed miserably in most ways, but that was what we were trying to establish. So when we were able to come here and actually be, in a sense, a British band, it was incredibly bizarre.
Well, that's how you get the most interesting music, because the Beatles were trying to sound like Tamla Motown and not remotely coming close.
No, exactly.
That's how you got the Beatles sound. Well, let's hear a track from those early days, and this is from The Breakthrough. This is Amateur Hour. Amateur Hour by Sparks. What, 74?
Yeah, 74, yeah.
Who produced that?
Muff Winwood, actually.
There's another big name.
Another name, yeah. Muff was really partly responsible for bringing us to Britain. He and Chris Blackwell at Island Records, and it was sort of like the situation with Todd Rundgren previously, where they felt that there was something really something to be said about what we were doing musically. It just hadn't been exploited in the right sort of way up until then, and so Muff produced that first album with Kimono My House that had Amateur Hour on it, and also This Town Ain't Big Enough for Both of Us. And he just felt that there was something in Ron's songwriting and my singing and our whole just musical approach and what we were personality-wise that he felt could really work here. So they had proposed that just the two of us come over here and reform as an English band or other English musicians. And
dream come true.
Dream come true.
And it was really amazing because we had recorded This Town Ain't Big Enough for Both of Us, and he was the one that was pushing for that to be the first single. We were the ones that were being more conservative, saying, I don't know, it doesn't sound like a single, but we just give him an incredible amount of credit, both for the production of that album, but then also just for the choice of that song. It was braver, I think, than people are nowadays in that situation.
There's a whole other conversation to be had about how brave people are or are not nowadays. Yeah. Could I just rewind a moment? Because we just heard Hippopotamus, and when I first heard that, it was the first track of the Hippopotamus album that I heard at the Six Music Festival. And we've got a book by Anonymous, a hippopotamus, a painting by Hieronymus, a Bosch by Hieronymus, a Volkswagen microbus. How you can rhyme that without having no idea. Titus Andronicus, now he's gone under, worry not. And a woman with an abacus, she looks Chinese. And the whole surrealist kind of fantasy of this, born out on the cover of your album itself. Having come up with the idea of there being a hippopotamus in your pool, you then have to photograph a hippopotamus in your book in order to make
the lengths they go. Yeah. No, it started with just the music. We came up with that musical piece without any lyrics, and it seemed like it was crying out for something exotic to match the tone of the music, and the image of the hippopotamus came up, and then just one thing led to another.
Well, you see, I would like to propose that Sparks is a seriously underrated band, because people who know you as a band that has pushed musical boundaries. You've always gone for the left field edge and then pushed it a bit further. They know you for your wildly visual stage shows and for the diversity of your output, but what you're not acclaimed as is as great lyricists.
I appreciate it.
And I think the lyrics of Sparks are on a par with any of the great lyricists, your Bob Dylans, your Leonard Cohens, and all the rest of it, because you put so much care and thought and intelligence into them.
I appreciate that, because we obviously, the music, to be honest, is what matters the most to us, but we really pay attention to detail on the lyrics. I mean, I'm a great lover of some older songwriters like George, Ira Gershwin and those sorts of Cole Porter, where it seemed like there was real attention to detail in the writing, and I'm not trying to make a comparison quality wise, but just as far as the intent to have lyrics that really match the quality of the music is something that we've always been interested in.
For yourself, Russell, though, you have to kind of give life to these lyrics and try and pack them into the available space and make them come alive.
And trying to remember them live as well.
Oh, man, yes.
Studio is one thing when you have a piece of paper sitting in front of you, and then having to learn 20-odd songs with as dense of lyrics as Ron writes. yeah, it's a challenge.
So do you, I mean, you must be the world's expert on his lyrics.
At least I hear them first. I hear them before anybody else. Yeah,
For sure. I just wondered if you had a particular favourite across those 40 years, 40, 50 years of career, a particular favourite that you have enjoyed singing for the lyrical value itself intrinsically.
Well, I mean, there's so many and different with different sentiments to them, but even just so we keep it even more current on the Hippopotamus album, when just even Missionary Position, that song when Ron had first presented those lyrics and then thinking of singing it, and it was, it's something at first that maybe you might smile at, but there's something kind of just really heartwarming about the sentiment in that song, where it's, a guy just saying that the tried and true can sometimes work, in all sorts of different ways. You can, extrapolate from the literal sense of it, but there's something just really touching about it to me. But then it's also strange singing the chorus, singing Missionary Position, which isn't a typical rock pop lyric to sing either. So it's kind of, and then after the fact, now that people are aware of the album, then it becomes something, well, that's just one of the songs. But at the time when I was first having to sing it, you're kind of going, gosh, this is different, huh?
There's an earnestness to the attitude of the narrator of the song, and Russell is able to kind of convey that earnestness, that it isn't like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge sort of song, that there really is kind of a sincerity about the way that the narrator of the song is feeling about the situation.
And I think also the melody of it, too, helps to get across that feeling. And another song that was When Do I Get to Sing My Way, because that one's another one where the melody of the song and the lyrics are almost, they're like intertwined. You really can't separate the two, but the kind of the feeling that comes across with just that melody is so perfect for conveying the sensibility of the lyrics to When Do I Get to Sing My Way.
Wasn't this a big hit in Germany?
Yeah. It was the #1 radio song for that whole year in Germany.
The whole year?
Yeah. It was just like sort of ubiquitous. And it had such little impact in other, like it didn't really do a lot in Britain, which is odd. But
also, just speaking about lyrics, that we had a German manager who lived in the UK, but we said, so how many of the German people are really understanding the lyrics? Because these are actually some of my favorite lyrics on When Do I Get to Sing My Way, and he said probably very few. And there was always difficulties with DJs even pronouncing the title of the song, but in some way it was getting across to people in just some kind of deeper level, which was really, was really inspiring to us.
Do you think you could give us an extract from those, Russell?
Okay, yes, a theatrical reading of When Do I Get to Sing My Way, lyrics by Ron Mael. No use in lecturing them or in threatening them. They will just say, "Who are you? Is that a question or not?" And you see that the plot is predictable, not new. But you're still stunned at the things you will do. No use in taking their time or in wasting 2 dimes on a call to God knows who, when all you feel is the rain and it's hard to be vain when no person looks at you. So just be gracious and wait in the queue. So when do I get to sing my way? When do I get to feel like Sinatra felt? When do I get to sing my way, in heaven or hell? So when do I get to do it my way? When do I get to feel like Sid Vicious felt? When do I get to sing my way, in heaven or hell?
Oh, very good. Excellent. So it does work as poetry. Has anyone ever written, put together a book of your poems?
Yeah, actually there is a book out now of Sparks lyrics called In the Words of Sparks. And it is sort of a for us, it is kind of interesting to see the lyrics divorced from the music too. And so this was the first time we got that opportunity. And there's, I don't know how many sets of our lyrics are in this book, but it's kind of neat to treat it in a separate way, divorced from the melodies, and to see, to actually read them. And I think you pick up different things in the songs when you don't hear the music that accompanies it. And Morrissey did a really nice forward to the book as well.
Morrissey, of whom
that
more
guy.
Of whom more anon.
I don't know if you've heard of him or not.
we'll get
Controversial figure? No.
We'll get to Morrissey a little bit later on in the conversation. But I wanted to rewind to 1977, which was a kind of tectonic year in terms of pop music. That on the one hand, in Britain, that punk was coming to the fore, and certainly in New York the same thing was happening. It took a little longer in Los Angeles, but at the same time, Bowie's taken himself off to Berlin, and he's making music of a completely other nature, and we've still got big kind of pop songs at the top of the charts. But you take yourselves off to Giorgio Moroder. How on earth did that happen?
Well, I mean, the one time we really felt threatened by kind of a movement musically in pop music was when the punk situation happened, because it kind of made everybody feel irrelevant in a certain sense, and we kind of felt it also at the same time, just by chance, that we had taken the band approach as far as we could take it that time. We had worked with Tony Visconti, adding extra instruments to a band, but it was still a band approach. And we heard "I Feel Love" on the radio, the Donna Summer track, and we thought, was there a possibility to be working in this kind of way, where there was kind of a cold electronic background, but with Russell's singing and those lyrics around them? So we approached him, and just by luck, he was looking to work with a band at the time, because he'd always worked with, what you might call professional singers like Donna Summer, who was incredible, but it was a different kind of singing style than Russell's. And so it was just a situation where we all went into that recording studio, just really the three of us plus an engineer, not knowing what the outcome of this was going to be. And those are always good situations where you don't know what the end result was going to be, and it was just a magical time for us musically. And then the reaction to that record, I mean, critically, the record, when it first came out, the #1 in Heaven album, so many of the critics thought we were being traitors to the rock cause, but we were kind of heartwarmed. It was heartwarming to know the reaction by, in particular, the British public to that album, and there were 3 songs that did really, really well. So it was just a great experience, and great working with Giorgio, because we had never worked in electronic form. It was 1979 that we recorded that album, and we just learned so much, things that we still use today.
Let's take a listen to the title track. This is the #1 song in heaven, part 2, incidentally. The #1 song in heaven from the #1 in Heaven album in 1979, which manages the difficult balancing trick of sounding both like Giorgio Moroder and like Sparks. You must be hugging yourselves when that came out.
Yeah, it was because it was something that I don't think any of the three of us, Giorgio, Noran, or I, knew exactly what it was that we had, and so it's like Ron had mentioned earlier, when you just kind of don't know exactly where you're headed with a project, and you have those kind of results, I think it's the most satisfying. And so we and then it became an album. So a lot of people, there were questions of, well, can a band be just 2 guys in a studio now? Because a band is supposed to be rock guitars and a bass player and a drummer, but we had, changed the format of what a band could be. And then later on, it I think helped to spawn some other groups, that were working in a similar format later on of using just electronics and being a duo. And there's the Pet Shop Boys and
Soft Cell,
Erasure, those sorts of bands, and Human League to a certain extent. And so I think the album really did have an impact on a lot of music.
The one negative thing was that we couldn't tour at the time with that album because there wasn't the possibility in a technological sense, as jet lag speaking there, technological sense, just because the studio that we recorded that album with was just banks and banks of electronic equipment, and there was none of the means that are available now to be able to do that. So we never performed anything from the Number One in Heaven album until 1994, when we had kind of not toured in Britain for such a long time. We came back and were able to play at least a good portion of that album.
The technology is the way that the technology has developed and how that's then impacted on the music is really interesting, because it was prior to 77, 79, it wasn't possible to even do that because the sequences weren't precise enough. But almost immediately, the development of cheap microchips meant that we got programmable drum machines at an affordable price, and we got little sort of two-finger mono synths available from Yamaha and Roland, so that the bedroom bands, the kind of 19-year-olds who heard what you were doing, could go and make their own version of it and become the Soft Cells and become the Orchestra Manoeuvres in the Darks and everything, and Eurythmics, and just basically one person doing the technology and one person doing the vocals. Between them, they could kind of carry it off.
No, absolutely. And then even in our case of Sparks, we could continue later on working with it in our own home studio setup as well. And we feel there's nothing but positive things to be able to work in that sort of way where you can create anything in your own environment and not be at the mercy of a traditional recording studio, where for us it's really stifling because you're kind of always, you're looking at the clock, and then there's other people looking over your shoulder, and we're very insular the way we work. And so to be able to do it all in your own environment at home is just such a blessing in so many different ways. And all the arguments about digital versus analog, all that, to us, it's not really relevant. It's what you do musically, and it's kind of applying the musical side of things, and it can be digitally recorded, it can be analog recorded. That's really not the important thing to us. It's just what you do with the technology. If you want to make something sound like analog, there's certainly ways to dirty up your recording, to add a little more hiss to your digital recording, if you like.
It is hysterically funny, though, isn't it? The way that people are putting crackle onto their recordings to make them sound like they're samples.
Yeah,
things like
no, and we work so early on with electronics, but we're not religious about anything, in that sense, with analog versus digital, and the important thing to us is to be able to record kind of at will and record in ways that where the recording isn't precious, that you can just try things, and people only hear what we want them to hear, and there are so many things that we record that we just don't think are worth it, but there were paths that were worth taking in order to get to a certain place.
Now, you've carried on down the decades, going your own sweet way, and quite often at diametric sort of right angles to where the mainstream was heading at the time.
Unfortunately.
Well, no, that's what I'm really interested in, because every time we get a really important band comes by for an interview and we get to chat to them, they'll go, yeah, we could have been successful if we'd done this. And they go, what? Do you think you're successful? I mean, do you think of Sparks as a successful venture?
Well, we think we're incredibly successful in that we're doing music now that's vital, we feel. And there's, and so it's however you measure success, there's different ways to measure it, but the one way that we always feel that the just the most valuable way of measuring success is if what you're doing creatively is strong, and we feel that that's the thing that we take the most pride in.
You are incredibly driven, it seems to me, that so many... I'm roughly the same age as you, and so I know how the energy levels kind of flag as one gets older and the aches and pains come up. But, you know, it is hard to keep that up, and so many musicians of our generation have failed to renew their wellspring of energy. They've started doing kind of ruminative records about what it's like getting older, and, you know,
Exactly.
and the subject matter gets duller, and the music gets more and more formulaic. So it becomes like a set of tram lines. The song starts, and within 8 bars, you know where it's going to end up.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, it really is important for us to keep that strong element of unpredictability, both within an individual work, but also just in a general sense. And, you know, I mean, you know, maybe it's a lack of depth that we aren't kind of reflecting on our years, but we're just not that kind of people, and we're fortunate enough to have enough energy to really focus on just kind of pushing things as far as we can. And, you know, we've gotten so far at this point where we're still doing what we feel is important music. We want to see how far we can kind of take that.
So, 2002, there's another body swerve in that direction, but one that suddenly catches light and catches the public imagination. It becomes commercially successful, it becomes critically successful with the album Lil Beethoven. So much so that in 2004 you issue a deluxe version of the record, which takes it even further, and certainly brought you in here to Six Music, which is where our paths first crossed. And here you decided to turf out the drum kit.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to make a record with no drums on it?
Well, and starting off, no guitars on it as well. I mean, we had written probably 20 songs for an album that was going to be at the time a little Beethoven, and we kind of just felt that we were going through the motions. They were really good songs, but what was the point, you know? And if we're not, it's a cliche, but if you're not excited about it, you can't expect anybody else to be. And so we just decided to scrap that, as hard as it was. You know, as a songwriter, every piece you do is precious and wonderful and beautiful, but you have to kind of step back from that and analyze things in a more harsh way. And we did at the time. We decided just to start all over again and record an album without knowing exactly where it was going, except working at least from the beginning and in things like Rhythm Thief and all, where it was eliminating drums, drum kits, and also guitars, but trying to find out other ways of having a real propulsion to the songs, both with like really dynamic string parts that would take the place of those instruments, and also having vocals that were really dynamic and stacked that would really give the songs the same power that they would have if you were using more traditional instruments.
Well, I'm going to play a song from that, and this one doesn't stint on the lyrical venom either. This is What Are All These Bands So Angry About?
Hey everybody, what do you know? What are all these bands so angry about?
What are all these bands so angry about, from a Lil Beethoven in 2002, 2004. Though you did allow yourself some timpani in there, though.
Yeah, we cheated because we
orchestral drums.
Yeah, we gradually, once we kind of had set the kind of diagram of the album and there were pieces established, we kind of went back and within that context there are guitars on it. There's a song called Ugly Guys and Beautiful Girls that is pretty guitar-y and has drums on it. But by and large, this album was a real departure for us, because both from the instrument standpoint, but also just the way that words were used, because in general we're pretty wordy in what our songs are, and this was using kind of more limited, repetitive phrases in ways that were both, we were listening a lot to kind of modern classical things like John Adams and Philip Glass operas, where vocals are used in those kind of repetitive ways often. And also we really liked a lot of hip hop at the time, in particular Public Enemy, where vocals were used in a way that was kind of not as obviously their things are wordy, but there are instances where kind of phrases are repeated over and over again for a musical effect.
Don't believe the hype.
Yeah.
And the don't.
Yeah.
Each time.
So those kind of things really, were an influence on that album.
Before we leave that album, there was on the deluxe version something called Inspiration Behind Lil Beethoven, Fear of a Blank Page. Every writer's nightmare.
Yeah, that was Ron's doing that one. Yeah, the classic Fear of a Blank Page, where there's just some sheet music, I think, and a bunch of staffs with no notation.
Yeah. So it was that, every time I start off, you kind of think by now, surely you must have some confidence in what you're doing, and never.
It seems to be a recurring thing as we talk, that you actually are challenged by but still adore the idea of going into a studio not knowing what the hell is going to come out.
No, that's really the case, and I think that's what keeps us, just hopefully fresh sounding, just because we don't know where we're headed, but we still have this kind of ambition, and for us it's still exciting knowing the possibilities, or not even knowing what the possibilities can be of when you go into a studio, and hoping that you're going to come out of it surprising yourself.
Well, let's go away from the record collection for a moment to an achievement that you made in 2008, where you did something that no other band that I've ever heard of in the history of modern pop music has ever done, which is to play their entire catalogue, and a catalogue of 20-plus albums at that, in the course of that many nights, one after the other. So it knocks into a cocked hoop the idea of playing the greatest hits album or the most famous album in its entirety. You did 22 albums.
Yeah. So it was five nights a week for it was like 4 weeks or so. It was building up to the release of Exotic Creatures of the Deep at the time, and so every day we would commute to Islington to play one album after another, and one strange kind of consequence of that was we performed the songs in the order that they were on the album. So like when we would do Come On to My House, the opening song of the set, rather than being a song towards the end of the set, was This Sounding Big Enough for Both of Us. And we kind of went into it thinking, oh, this is a cool idea, and then we realized this is like ridiculous, because every day we would do an album, and then we rehearsed for it for 4 months in Los Angeles before doing it, but it really didn't matter that much, because you had to immediately erase the thought of the album that you had done the night before. And so we'd go back, and then the next morning you would just be sitting in your hotel room going over that evening's
panicking.
Because it was, it was a ridiculous task, and one that, we won't ever do again. But I'm also happy that we did it, because it was something really, really special, and it also gave us a chance to kind of reassess some of the albums that we thought were maybe a little weaker than other ones when they're put in kind of the context of being played maybe in a way that was more assured. Some of the things that were kind of bypassed along the way, we really felt were strong. Some of the albums that had done fairly well in the States, but that were really unknown in the UK, albums from the 80s where people kind of thought we disappeared but we were just, working in other geographic areas.
So, why did you choose the UK to do it rather than Los Angeles?
Well, there's always been a really strong bond with the UK and Sparks, from the very beginning. And so we thought it would be we wanted to pick only one city in the world to do it rather than having to do this twice. So London for us was just the obvious choice, that we felt it would be the city that would embrace something as bold as doing 21 of your albums in a row, night after night.
Followed by the new one.
Followed by the new one.
There were people that, were incredible enough to come to all the shows. So.
Didn't you offer a golden ticket if people wanted to come to all of them?
Yeah.
That's right. This year actually is the 10th anniversary. We can't believe it's already been 10 years since we did the 21 nights, and it was all building up to the release of the album Exotic Creatures of the Deep that we just now have come out with it on vinyl, a special vinyl edition. It was never on vinyl at the time, with a groovy, I think, turquoise two disc set it is. So, yeah.
Well, we're going to hear a song from that album in just a moment, but just one last question. On those 22 nights, did you actually resort to lyrics on a music stand?
No,
you memorized every one?
Oh, in my brain, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, no, it was, like Ron said, 4 months of rehearsal, so it was an undertaking.
Let's hear Lighten Up Morrissey.
She won't go out with me, no, she won't go out 'cause my
Lighten Up Morrissey from the album Exotic Creatures of the Deep in 2008, which was the culmination of the Sparks Spectacular at the time. What I love about that record is that you wouldn't have to be a Sparks fan to go, OMG, what is this? Who are these people? And why are they telling Morrissey to lighten up?
And fortunately enough, he lightened up enough to appreciate the song. He took it in the right spirit, because it isn't kind of a negative comment about Morrissey. It's more of a situational thing where a girl is obsessed with Morrissey, and her boyfriend is just wishing that the whole situation weren't like that he was the only one competing for her affections.
Famously, Frank Zappa got hurled off stage at the Rainbow Theatre in London by an irate fan whose girlfriend had fallen in love with Zappa. I mean, he was the most unlikely pin-up for any jealous, jealous macho lover to go and assault him. But have you ever encountered those kinds of difficulties?
No, I mean, maybe not in that exact same way, but lyrically, this song almost does apply. We
do have our obsessives, though.
Yeah, we have our obsessives, but maybe they express their obsession in different ways.
Yeah. More positive ways.
There's an interesting take on it on Johnny Delusional, with the FFS song.
Right.
Could you tell us, before we hear that, how the tie-up with Franz Ferdinand came about? Yeah,
when Franz Ferdinand had released their first album, there was an interview with them in the Times, and they had mentioned that Sparks was one of their big influences. And at that time we had liked, we really liked the what they were doing then, and we had met up with them in LA at that time, and we said, oh, someday we should do something together. But a lot of artists say that, and it never happens. And then, so it didn't happen at that time. But then 10 years later, we bumped into Alex walking in San Francisco, and just by mere coincidence, we were both playing San Francisco at the time. We said, whatever happened to that idea about doing something together? And he said, yeah, we should really do that. And then one thing led to the next. And at first it was talk about just doing one song together, or maybe a single. and then it kind of escalated into doing an entire album, and then it escalated into doing a tour as this band called FFS. So,
who thought of the name?
I think it was actually Paul, the drummer from France, that thought of the name. So.
That must have been another moment where you hugged yourselves with glee.
Yeah, no, it was a good name for a band.
He's a great drummer, but an even greater namer of bands.
Words are in my head, but I can't enunciate them.
Johnny Delusional here.
Johnny Delusional by FFS here on Six Music. It's Tom Robinson here in the company of Ron and Russell Mail and Sparks. And that lyric, again, it's just a cracker. Could you give us another?
Yeah, it was another song that Ron had written, both musically and the lyrics. Again, I really like the lyrics to this song as well. Words are in my head, but I can't enunciate them clearly. Headphones on your head, they prevent a chance to even try. Some might find me borderline attractive from afar, but afar is not where I can stay, and there you are. Though I want you, I know I haven't a chance. Still I want you, Johnny Delusional here.
Fantastic. They're merciless in a way.
Yeah, and we kind of liked the borderline attractive line so much we came out with a T-shirt of it on the tour. So we're commercializing all the way. You know,
I'd love to have a borderline attractive T-shirt.
We'll see if we can arrange one.
We can hook you up. We got connections. So.
That would be absolutely brilliant. So we find ourselves here with the Hippopotamus album last year, presaged by your appearance at the Six Music Festival. And again, the lyrics, the titles alone are a kind of haiku in their own right. I wondered, Ron, would you be willing to just read the list of titles as poetry?
Hippopotamus track list. Probably nothing. Missionary position. Edith Piaf said it better than me. Scandinavian design. Giddy giddy. What the hell is it this time? Unaware. Hippopotamus. Bummer. I wish you were fun. So tell me, Mrs. Lincoln, aside from that, how was the play? When you're a French director. The Amazing Mr. Repeat. A little bit like fun. Life with the Macbeths.
Life with the Macbeths. Russell, which one of those shall we play for an exemplary lyric?
Yeah, how about, So Tell Me, Mrs. Lincoln, aside from that, how was the play?
Yeah, definitely title of the year. Let's take a listen. From the album Hippopotamus, which was one of my choice albums of the year. That's So Tell Me, Mrs. Lincoln. Aside from that, how was the play? It's been a real pleasure catching up with you guys. Thank you so much for your
Thanks
time.
for having us.
Really appreciate it. So you haven't rested on your laurels, though. You're already turning out new music and unleashing it on an unsuspecting public.
Always, yeah. There was one track that we recorded a couple of extra tracks on the Hippopotamus album, and for, I don't know, a variety of reasons, they weren't included on the album, I mean, partly because of length, but one of them was checkout time, 11 a.m., and so we're really happy that it can finally kind of see the light of day now.
And it's sort of it's the lyric about a breakup, and, there's traditional ways to say in a pop song to describe a romantic breakup, but this one, Ron came up with this idea for the breakup to be rather than done in a sort of more traditional way of the guy saying it's checkout time 11 a.m. and using the hotel kind of thought as the way of saying goodbye.
Well, on that note,
Yeah.
On that upbeat note,
Always
sorry to make
uplifting.
your day bring a downer to it. But
listen,
Keep your eyes to the heavens.
you see, I would ask you what you're going to do next, but even you don't know because you're going to go
we
into
don't
that
have a
studio.
clue.
But we know whatever it is, it's going to be interesting.
Well, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank
It
you.
was a pleasure.
Lively rates are posted on the door, but they're inflated, so you think that you are special for the rates you really pay. Hope there's some deduction for the sadness that's contained inside the room that we're vacating and the gloom that's on display. We got a pack, 10:45, not much to pack, not much